The summer sun blazed mercilessly over Thunder Ridge Valley, a harsh reminder that mercy was as rare as rainfall in these parts. The wooden sign marking the entrance to Redemption Springs creaked on rusted hinges, its weathered letters barely legible against the sun-bleached wood. A dusty wind carried tumbleweeds across the town's main street, where the Silver Dollar Saloon stood as the sole bastion of life in the afternoon heat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Through the heat waves rising from the parched earth, a lone figure appeared on the horizon. The rider moved unhurriedly, almost lazily, atop what appeared to be the most pitiful excuse for a horse anyone in Redemption Springs had ever seen. The animal's coat, once a proud chestnut, had faded to a dusty brown, and its gait suggested years of hard miles. At the hitching post outside the Silver Dollar, 3 men in expensive riding gear watched the approaching pair with poorly concealed amusement. Their own horses were prime stock, gleaming coats, proud bearing, and tack that cost more than most folks made in a year. The men themselves wore the latest frontier fashion, their gun belts polished and positioned just so, marking them as newcomers, trying too hard to look the part. The rider drew closer, and details began to emerge. His clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained, speaking of someone who understood the value of taking care of what he had. A broad-brimmed hat cast shadows across his features, though keen observers might notice how his posture suggested someone younger than his mount's aged appearance would suggest. "Well, look what we got here," drawled the tallest of the 3 men, adjusting his oversized belt buckle. "Ain't seen nothing that decrepit since my granddaddy's plow horse died." His companions snickered on cue, their laughter carrying across the quiet street. The rider didn't acknowledge them, guiding his horse to the water trough with careful consideration. The animal moved with deliberate steps, each motion measured and precise despite its apparent age. Up close, those who knew horses might notice something odd about the beast, the way its ears moved, constantly alert, or how its muscles rippled. Beneath the dull coat, Cole Harrison, owner of the Silver Dollar, watched from behind his bar as the stranger dismounted. In 15 years of running the saloon, he'd learned to read men like others, read wanted posters. Something about this one made him pause. Maybe it was the way he moved, fluid and balanced, or how his right hand never strayed far from his holstered revolver. The 3 men from outside followed the stranger in, still wearing their smirks like badges. Their leader, who'd introduced himself as Victor Crane earlier that day, took up position near the bar. His companions, brothers by the name of Wesley and Wyatt Pierce, flanked him with the practiced ease of men used to intimidation. "Water," the stranger said quietly, placing a coin on the bar. His voice carried the kind of softness that made smart men pay attention. "Matches your horse's speed, I reckon," Crane called out, drawing more snickers from the Pierce brothers. "That beast of yours looks about ready for the glue factory." The stranger took his time responding, sipping his water with deliberate care. When he finally spoke, his voice remained quiet, but carried to every corner of the suddenly attentive saloon. "Thunder's seen more miles than most, that's true enough." "Thunder?" Wesley Pierce's laugh was sharp and forced. "Ain't that a bit ambitious for a nag that looks like it'd lose a race against a 3-legged mule?" The stranger set his glass down carefully. "Names can be deceiving, like how you boys are dressed as cowboys but carry yourselves like men who've never worked an honest day." The atmosphere in the saloon shifted, invisible currents of tension replacing the previous mockery. Crane's hand drifted toward his gun, but something in the stranger's posture made him hesitate. "Those are fighting words, old-timer," Wyatt Pierce growled, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The stranger turned slowly, and for the first time the afternoon light caught his features clearly. His face was weathered but not old, marked more by wind and sun than years. His eyes, pale as morning frost, carried the kind of steady gaze that made men question their choices. Not fighting words, he corrected softly. Just an observation, like how I've been observing that gun. Belt of yours sits wrong, too new, too stiff. Man who wears his iron like jewelry usually ain't had cause to draw it for real. Crane's face flushed red. You got a mighty loose tongue for a man riding a horse that's one strong breeze away from collapsing. Thunder's carried me through worse than strong breezes, the stranger replied, his voice taking on an edge of steel. Through Apache territory during the last uprising, across the Mojave when water was scarce than gold, and away from more trouble than you've likely ever seen. Something in his tone made the saloon's other patrons edge away from the confrontation, finding sudden interest in distant corners or the bottoms of their glasses. Harrison's hand moved slowly beneath the bar, where a shotgun waited for serious trouble. That so? Crane's mock courtesy barely masked his growing anger. Well, maybe we ought to see just how fast that walking burial plot of yours can really move. Say a race, 10 miles out to Carson's Creek and back. Winner takes the loser's horse and whatever else they're carrying. The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mighty confident for someone who's never seen thunder run. Ain't much to see. Wesley Pierce snorted. That horse looks like it'd need a map to find its own feed bag. The stranger finished his water, each movement deliberate and unhurried. Terms? Simple enough, Crane grinned, showing teeth too white for a real frontiersman. Tomorrow at dawn, 10 miles out, 10 miles back. First one to reach the saloon. Wins, and to make it interesting. He pulled out a heavy purse, letting it thud on the bar. 500 in gold, says my Arabian thoroughbred makes your old nag eat dust. The saloon grew quiet enough to hear dust settling on the floorboards. 500 in gold was serious money, the kind of money that could buy a small ranch or a large herd. The stranger studied Crane for a long moment, his pale eyes seeming to look straight through the man's expensive facade. Been a while since. Thunder's had a good run, he said finally. Might do him good to stretch his legs. He reached into his vest and withdrew a leather pouch, adding it to Crane's on the bar. Harrison, acting as stakeholder, verified the amounts while the men shook hands, Crane's grip clearly trying to assert dominance, the stranger's steady and controlled. As the group separated, Wyatt Pierce couldn't resist one final jab. Better. Hope that old horse of yours doesn't die of fright when he sees a real runner. The stranger paused at the door, the setting sun casting his shadow long across the saloon floor. Funny thing about Thunder, he said quietly. He's a lot like his rider. We both got real good at letting folks underestimate us. He stepped out into the dying light, leaving behind a saloon full of speculating patrons and 3 men who were starting to wonder if they'd just made a serious mistake. Outside, Thunder stood exactly where his rider had left him, his seemingly tired frame belying the alertness in his dark eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the stranger mounted up, Harrison watched from the saloon window, noting how the horse's movements suddenly seemed different, more fluid, more powerful. The old bartender had seen a lot of tricks and trades in his time, but something told him tomorrow's race would reveal more than just a horse's true speed. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting Redemption Springs in shades of gold and shadow. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or humiliation, but as the stranger rode toward his camp outside town, there was something in his bearing that suggested he'd faced far worse stakes than a simple horse race. In the gathering dusk, Thunder's hoofbeats echoed with a rhythm that seemed oddly familiar to Harrison, a rhythm he hadn't heard since his days riding with the cavalry. It was the steady, ground-eating pace of a horse that could run for days without tiring, the kind of horse that had once carried army dispatches through hostile territory when lives depended on speed and endurance. Dawn painted the eastern sky, in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across Redemption Springs' weathered buildings. The townsfolk gathered early, drawn by news of the impending race and the substantial wager it carried. Nearly every resident had staked a claim in the betting pool, though few had put money on the mysterious stranger and his seemingly worn-out. Mount. Clayton Miller, the town's blacksmith, stood examining the hooves of Crane's impressive Arabian. The horse was indeed magnificent, 17 hands of gleaming black coat and perfectly proportioned muscle. Its lineage was evident in every proud line, from its delicate ears to its perfectly shaped hooves. "Fine piece of horseflesh," Miller commented, running experienced hands along the Arabian's legs. "Must have cost a pretty penny," Crane pretended at the attention his horse was receiving. "Imported straight from Kentucky, his grandsire won the Derby 2 years running." He patted the horse's neck possessively. "Fastest thing on 4 legs this side of the Mississippi." At the other end of the street, the stranger led Thunder from the livery stable where they'd spent the night. In the crisp morning light, something about the old horse's movements caught Miller's trained eye. The way he placed his feet, the subtle shift of muscle beneath his dull coat. There was a precision there that seemed at odds with his apparent age. Rebecca Sawyer, who ran the general store, approached the stranger with a tin cup of coffee. She'd been watching him since his arrival, noting details others missed. "Thought you might need this," she offered. "Morning's got a bite to it." The stranger accepted the coffee with a slight nod. "Kind of you, Mom." His voice was softer than most would expect from a man of his bearing, carrying an educated note that didn't quite match his trail-worn appearance. "That's an interesting brand your horse carries," Rebecca remarked casually, gesturing to a barely visible mark on Thunder's flank. "Don't think I've seen it like this before." The stranger's pale eyes flickered to her face, measuring. "Most haven't," he agreed quietly. "It's from a ranch that doesn't exist anymore." Before Rebecca could probe further, William "Doc" Thompson hurried over, his medical bag in hand. "As the town physician, I feel obligated to check on your horse's condition before this race." His concern seemed genuine, though his eyes kept darting to Thunder with professional curiosity. "Thunder's fine, Doc," the stranger assured him, a hint of amusement touching his voice. "Been through worse than a morning run." Doc Thompson persisted, moving closer to examine the horse. "At his age, the strain could be—" His voice trailed off as Thunder turned to face him, and something in the animal's dark eyes made him step back involuntarily. "Well, I suppose you know him best." Across the street, the Pierce brothers were making a show of checking Crane's tack, their movements exaggerated for the growing crowd's benefit. Wesley spun an elaborate tale about the Arabians' racing victories back east, while Wyatt took side bets from eager townsfolk. Samuel Chase, the town's young telegraph operator, pushed through the crowd with a piece of paper clutched in his hand. He made his way to Sheriff Marcus Ward, who'd been watching the proceedings with careful attention. "Sheriff," Chase wheezed, out of breath from running. "Just got this from Silver Creek Station. Thought you should see it right away." Ward unfolded the telegram, his weathered face growing increasingly serious as he read. His eyes moved to Crane and his companions, then to the stranger, who was quietly adjusting Thunder's simple bridle. "Everything all right, Sheriff?" Rebecca asked, noting his expression. Ward carefully refolded the telegram, tucking it into his vest pocket. "Just some news about a bank robbery over in Silver Creek. 3 men on expensive horses. Witnesses said one had a fancy belt buckle and 2 were brothers." His voice carried just enough to draw attention, though he appeared to be speaking only to Rebecca. Crane's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun before he caught himself. The Pierce brothers stopped their showmanship, suddenly more interested in watching the crowd than entertaining it. The stranger continued his preparations unhurried, though Rebecca noticed his position had shifted slightly, giving him a clear view of both Crane's group and the main street. Judge Albert Hawkins, who'd been appointed to oversee the race and handle any disputes, called for the competitors to gather at the starting line. As town officials marked out the course and reviewed the rules, An undercurrent of tension replaced the previous carnival atmosphere. "Riders will follow the main road to Carson's Creek," Hawkins announced, his judicial voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "The creek crossing is marked with red flags. Round the flags and return to this spot. First horse to cross this line wins. Any interference with the other rider will result in immediate disqualification." The stranger swung into Thunder's saddle with fluid grace that belied his trail-worn appearance. The old horse's ears pricked forward, and those standing closest might have noticed how his muscles tensed, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Crane mounted his Arabian with considerably more flash, making sure everyone appreciated his horsemanship. The expensive horse pranced beneath him, picking up on its rider's nervous energy. "Any last chance to change your mind?" Crane called out, his previous mockery carrying an edge of something darker. "Hate to see an old horse run himself to death." The stranger's response was quiet, but carried clearly in the morning air. "Funny thing about running to death, man needs to be mighty sure he knows what's chasing him." Something in his tone made Crane's smile falter. The Pierce brothers exchanged glances, their hands drifting closer to their guns. Sheriff Ward moved through the crowd, positioning deputies at strategic points. His actions seemed casual, but Rebecca noticed how they gave him clear lines of fire. If needed, Judge Hawkins raised his arm, commanding attention. "Gentlemen, take your positions." As the two riders lined up, the morning sun caught something half hidden by the stranger's coat, a silver star, worn smooth by years of use, pinned to his vest beneath his trail duster. The crack of the judge's pistol shattered the morning quiet. The Arabian leaped forward like an arrow loose from a bow, its powerful stride immediately putting distance between itself and Thunder. The crowd's cheers followed Crane as he quickly took the lead, his horse's speed impressive to behold. The stranger and Thunder started more slowly, their pace measured and steady. Some in the crowd laughed, already counting their losses, but Rebecca noticed Sheriff Ward watching them with particular interest. As the riders disappeared into the distance, Doc Thompson moved to stand beside Rebecca. "Did you see it?" he asked, quietly. "See what?" "That old horse is breathing, steady as a clock even at the start, and his legs, the muscle definition's all wrong for a worn-out nag." The doctor shook his head in wonder. "Whatever that horse is, he's been disguised to look old and tired." "Masterfully done, too," Rebecca smiled slightly. "Like his rider, you mean?" In the distance, dust clouds marked the rider's progress. Crane's Arabian maintained its impressive lead, running like the champion it was bred to be. But Thunder's steady pace continued unchanged, neither gaining nor losing ground, moving with the relentless rhythm of a horse that knew exactly how much road lay ahead. The real race, Rebecca suspected, wasn't just about speed. As she watched Sheriff Ward reading the telegram again, she had a feeling that by day's end, Redemption Springs would witness more than just a contest of horseflesh. The morning wind carried a hint of change, and somewhere out on the trail to Carson's Creek, a supposedly old horse and his mysterious rider were about to show their true colors. The trail to Carson's Creek cut through some of the most treacherous terrain in Thunder Ridge Valley. Jagged rocks and sudden drops made the path dangerous for any horse running at full speed. Crane's Arabian, despite its impressive breeding, began to show signs of strain as the rough ground took its toll. Its powerful strides remained beautiful to behold, but sweat darkened its gleaming coat, and its breathing grew increasingly labored. Behind them, Thunder's hoofbeats maintained their steady rhythm. The gap between the horses had stabilized, and keen observers might have noticed how the supposedly old horse navigated the difficult terrain with uncanny precision, each step placed with absolute certainty. Halfway to Carson's Creek, Crane glanced. He back and felt the first stirring of unease. The stranger sat in his saddle with the same relaxed posture as when they'd started, and Thunder showed no signs of tiring. If anything, The old horse seemed to be moving more smoothly now, as if warming up to his task. A shot cracked across the valley. Crane's Arabian shied violently, nearly unseating its rider. From behind a cluster of rocks, two masked men emerged. On horseback, rifles raised. They weren't wearing the Pierce brothers' expensive gear, but their positions suggested they'd been waiting specifically for this moment. "Off the horses, both of you," the larger man commanded, his voice muffled by a bandana. "This here's a toll road." Crane's reaction was telling. Instead of showing surprise or fear, annoyance flashed across his face. This wasn't part of the plan. The Arabian danced nervously beneath him, its racing stride broken, precious momentum lost. The stranger's response was more interesting. Thunder's pace never changed, but his rider's posture shifted subtly. Those mysterious pale eyes scanned the rocks above the ambushes, noting positions, checking for more hidden threats with practiced efficiency. "I said off the horses." The second ambusher fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near Thunder's hooves. The old horse didn't even flinch. "Might want to reconsider that," the stranger called out, his quiet voice carrying clearly. "Where you're holding that rifle, you're liable to hurt yourself more than anyone else." The first ambusher laughed harshly. "Think you're clever, old man? We've got the high ground and the drop on you. Now dismount or the next shot won't miss." "Three problems with that," the stranger replied, Thunder still moving forward at the same steady pace. "First, you're silhouetted against the morning sun. Poor tactical choice. Second, your horses are positioned wrong for a quick escape. And third," his voice took on an edge of steel, "that's not how you aim a rifle if you actually plan to shoot someone." The ambushers exchanged uncertain glances. Something in the stranger's tone made them hesitate, their confidence wavering. Crane seized the moment of distraction to spur his Arabian forward, but the horse's rhythm was broken. Its stride had lost the smooth power from earlier, and its breathing was increasingly ragged from the interrupted run. The larger ambusher swung his rifle toward Crane, but Thunder and his rider were suddenly between them, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for an old horse. The stranger's duster had fallen open, revealing not just the silver star glimpsed earlier, but a distinctive gun belt that made both ambushers pale beneath their masks. "That's a marshal's rig," the second ambusher breathed, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. 10 years with the territorial marshals," the stranger confirmed quietly. "Specialized in catching men who thought they were clever. Men who set up ambushes. Men who worked with corrupt bankers and judges to rob their own banks." Crane's Arabian was now fighting its bite, sensing its rider's growing tension. The expensive horse's racing experience didn't prepare it for the chaos of a potential gunfight. "You're lying," the first ambusher declared, but his rifle barrel wavered. "Marshal Evans retired years ago." "Evans did," the stranger agreed. "I didn't. Name's Marshal David Cole. Some folks used to call me Ghost because I had a habit of appearing where I wasn't expected, usually right in the middle of carefully planned schemes." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Even Crane's calculated facade cracked slightly, recognition and fear flickering across his face before he could hide it. "Ghost Cole's dead," the second ambusher protested. "Killed in that shootout in Copper Valley." "Stories of my death were somewhat exaggerated," Cole replied mildly. "Useful, though, letting certain people think I was gone. Made them careless, made them plan things out in the open, thinking no one was watching." Thunder's ears flicked forward and Cole's hand dropped casually closer to his gun. "Now we can do this the easy way, or we can demonstrate why Thunder here earned his name carrying me through some of the ugliest firefights in territorial history." The ambushers' resolve crumbled. They'd signed on for what they thought was a simple robbery, not a confrontation with a lawman whose reputation still haunted certain circles. "Crane didn't tell us you'd be here," the larger man blurted, then immediately regretted his words as Crane cursed violently. "Interesting." Cole's voice remained conversational, but his eyes were hard as steel. "And what exactly did Mr. Crane tell you about today's activities?" Instead of answering, the ambushers wheeled their horses and spurred them hard, fleeing through a narrow gap in the rocks. Cole made no move to pursue them, his attention now focused entirely on Crane. "Race isn't over," Crane snapped, trying to salvage some control of the situation. He spurred his Arabian again, but the horse's confident stride was gone. The interrupted pace and the tension in its rider's posture had taken their toll on its racing spirit. "No," Cole agreed quietly. "It isn't." Thunder moved forward, his steady pace unchanged despite the recent excitement. The old horse's breathing remained as regular as when they'd started, his muscles flowing smoothly beneath the deceptively dull coat. The trail ahead narrowed, forcing the horses to run closer together. Crane's Arabian was visibly tiring now, its early burst of speed exacting a heavy price. Thunder, by contrast, seemed to be just hitting his stride, his movements becoming more fluid with each mile. "Those men!" Cole called out, his voice carrying easily despite the pace. "They're wearing the same boots as the ones who robbed the Silver Creek Bank, same distinctive wear pattern on the heels. Wouldn't be surprised if they were hired by the same man with expensive taste in horses and a fondness for elaborate schemes." Crane's only response was to urge his flagging mount faster, but the Arabian had given its best in that early sprint. The proud horse's stride was shortening, its breathing increasingly labored. The Carson's Creek crossing appeared ahead, red flags marking the halfway point of their race. But as they approached the turn, both men knew they were running toward something bigger than a simple wager. The real race was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than mere gold. Thunder's steady hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, carrying the rhythm of justice long delayed, but finally closing in. The ghost of the territorial marshals was back on the hunt, and his old horse was about to show why some legends are best not underestimated. As they rounded the markers at Carson's Creek, the true nature of Thunder's steady pace became apparent. While Crane's Arabian struggled to maintain its failing speed, Thunder moved with the fluid grace of a horse entering its prime stride. The dull coat that had drawn so much mockery now seemed to shed years with each powerful step. 15 years. "Go!" Cole called out, his voice carrying over the sound of hoofbeats. A marshal's horse was stolen from a federal stable in Arizona territory. Special breed, trained for long pursuits. Horse had distinctive markings that some folks tried to hide with careful grooming and a few tricks to make him look older than he was. Crane's face twisted with growing recognition. "You're lying. That horse was sold at auction. I saw the papers myself." "Funny thing about papers," Cole replied evenly. "They're easy to forge when you've got friends in government offices. Friends who help arrange bank robberies and conveniently lose evidence." A rifle shot echoed from the cliffs above, but this time it wasn't aimed at the riders. A boulder crashed down the canyon wall, forcing both horses to veer sharply. Thunder responded instantly to Cole's subtle guidance, moving with the practiced ease of a mount that had faced far worse dangers. The Pierce brothers emerged from their hiding spots, having circled ahead during the race. Their expensive clothes were now covered in trail dust, their true nature showing through the carefully crafted facade. "You're supposed to be dead," Wesley Pierce shouted, his voice carrying an edge of panic. Judge Morrison himself confirmed. "It, Morrison?" Cole's smile was cold. "The same Morrison who signed off on those bank transfers last month? Interesting company you're keeping these days, Mr. Crane." Wyatt Pierce's rifle cracked again, but Thunder was already moving. The old horse's renowned speed finally revealed itself as he surged forward, covering ground with the powerful strides of a mount bred and trained for pursuit. His dull coat rippled with muscle that no truly aged horse could possess. "That's why you were so interested in this race," Cole continued, Thunder effortlessly maintaining position despite the gunfire. "Had to make sure no one recognized a horse that was supposed to be long gone, a horse that might connect certain people to certain crimes." Crane's Arabian, exhausted from its early sprint and frightened by the gunfire, began to falter. Its proud, Stride deteriorated into a labored gallop, its racing breeding ill-suited for this kind of challenge. More riders appeared on the trail ahead, local men hired to ensure Cole never finished the race. But they hesitated at the sight of Thunder's powerful advance and the unwavering aim of Cole's drawn revolver. "Last chance," Cole called out, his quiet voice somehow carrying over the chaos. "Though I should warn you, Thunder here gets mighty unhappy when people shoot at him. Picked up that habit during the Apache Wars. Horse with a memory for faces, especially ones that tried to do him harm." The hired guns wavered, looking to Crane for guidance. But Crane was focused entirely on keeping his struggling Arabian moving, the elaborate plan dissolving around him. "Tell me something," Cole said, Thunder moving with the same relentless pace that had made him legendary among the marshals. "Did Morrison arrange this whole race? His style, elaborate setups, multiple layers of deception, using greed to draw attention away from the real scheme." The sound of approaching riders echoed from behind them. Sheriff Ward and his deputies. Right on schedule. Cole had timed everything perfectly, knowing the race would expose all the players in Morrison's operation. Thunder's stride never faltered as they thundered toward Redemption Springs, his powerful muscles finally revealed for what they truly were. The horse that had helped build the legend of Ghost Cole was back on familiar ground, running down men who thought themselves above the law. The real race was just beginning, and this time, justice would not be denied its due. Redemption Springs emerged on the horizon, its buildings shimmering in the late morning heat. But the race's conclusion would unfold differently than anyone had anticipated. As they approached the town, Thunder's transformation was complete, the shuffling gait and weary appearance replaced by the powerful stride of a horse that had earned its name in battle. Elizabeth Beth Cooper, the town's schoolteacher, watched from the schoolhouse porch as riders approached. Unlike most residents, she recognized the significance of Thunder's running style. Before coming to Redemption Springs, she'd worked at Fort Anderson, where the Army's specialized cavalry units trained their mounts. "That's no ordinary horse," she whispered to Rebecca Sawyer, who joined her to watch. "That's a shadow runner." Shadow runner? Rebecca's eyes narrowed with interest. A special breed developed for the Army's covert operations. Horses trained to alter their gaits, disguise their true speed. Only 50 were ever bred, and most died during the Apache Wars. Beth's voice carried a mix of awe and recognition. "My father helped train them." The thundering of hooves drew closer, but instead of heading for the finish line, Cole guided Thunder toward the telegraph office. The Pierce brothers, their ambush failed, broke away from the main group and spurred their horses toward the livery stable where fresh mounts waited. Samuel Chase burst out of the telegraph office, waving a yellow paper. "Marshal, just came through from Fort Laramie." Cole smoothly dismounted, Thunder standing perfectly still despite the chaos around them. The horse's alert stance and precise movements revealed years of specialized training that no mere trail mount could possess. "Judge Morrison's been arrested," Chase announced breathlessly. "Federal agents found documents in his safe, records of every bank robbery he orchestrated across 3 territories." Crane's Arabian stumbled to a stop, its proud spirit broken by the punishing race. Its rider's face showed a similar transformation, the sophisticated facade crumbling to reveal desperate calculation beneath. Sheriff Ward and his deputies surrounded the area, cutting off escape routes. "Got another wire from Silver Creek," Ward called out. "Bank manager confessed everything, told them how Morrison's been using horse races and land deals to cover his operations." 15 years of planning, Cole said quietly, checking Thunder's tack with practiced efficiency. Morrison thought he'd buried all the evidence, eliminating every witness. Never occurred to him that one of his victims might survive, might spend years tracking his organization from the inside. Thunder's ears pricked forward as more riders approached. Federal agents who'd been positioned in nearby towns, waiting for this moment. The horse's stance shifted subtly, ready for action if needed. Beth Cooper moved closer, her trained eye noting details others missed. The way he moves, the muscle definition. This horse was part of the Ghost Squadron, wasn't? The unit that disappeared during the Phoenix Valley operation. Cole's hand rested on Thunder's neck, years of partnership evident in the gesture. Phoenix Valley wasn't quite what the reports claimed. Morrison made sure the official story painted us as casualties and gave him cover to eliminate a unit that knew too much about his operations. But you survived, Rebecca concluded. Thunder got us out, Cole acknowledged. Carried me 30 miles with 2 bullets in my leg, evaded 3 pursuit parties. By the time we recovered, Morrison had already spread word of our death. Made it easier to watch him, though. Amazing what people say around a simple horse trader. The Pierce brothers emerged from the livery stable leading fresh horses, but federal agents were already moving to cut them off. The elaborate scheme was unraveling thread by thread. Crane made one last desperate play. "You've got nothing on me." "Marshal, Morrison never put anything in writing, never left a trail." "Didn't need to," Cole replied. "Thunder here has a remarkable memory for faces. Recognized you the moment you walked into that salon. You were at Phoenix Valley, weren't you, helping Morrison's men ambush federal agents?" Thunder's ears flattened at Crane's movement, remembering the man from that bloody day 15 years ago. The horse's reaction was all the confirmation needed. "A horse's testimony won't stand up in court," Crane sneered, but his bravado was failing. "No," Cole agreed, "but the documents Thunder and I collected while playing Prospector will. 15 years of land deals, bank transfers, witnesses who thought they were talking to a simple horse trader. Morrison got careless, started keeping records, needed them to keep track of all his schemes." Beth Cooper's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The Shadow Runners weren't just bred for speed and endurance. They were trained to help gather intelligence, to move unnoticed through enemy territory. "Best surveillance platform ever developed," Cole confirmed. "Who pays attention to an old horse and his rider? We've been to every town where Morrison's organization operated, gathering evidence piece by piece. Thunder's saddlebags carried more stolen documents and witness statements than any marshal's pouch. The federal agents were closing in, their net tightening around Morrison's conspirators, but Crane had one last card to play. "Morrison's got friends in high places," he threatened. "This won't end here." Thunder's reaction was instant. At some subtle signal from Cole, the horse's powerful muscles tensed, his true nature fully revealed. The magnificent animal that had outmaneuvered Apache war parties and survived Morrison's ambush stood ready for whatever came next. The morning sun caught Thunder's coat, and those watching closely might notice faint scars beneath the deliberately dulled hair, marks from battles long past, badges of honor from a war that had started in Phoenix Valley and would finally end here in Redemption Springs. The real race wasn't about speed or wages. It was about justice, about a horse and rider who had spent 15 years playing a part, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thunder had carried more than just his rider through those years. He'd carried the weight of a mission that would finally expose corruption at the highest levels of territorial justice. The ghost of Phoenix Valley had returned, and this time there would be nowhere for Morrison's men to hide. A crowd gathered around the telegraph office, drawn by the unfolding drama. Among them was Marcus Wade, a retired cavalry sergeant who'd once helped train mounts for special operations. His weathered face showed recognition as he studied Thunder's stance. "Sweet Lord," he muttered, moving closer. "Never thought I'd see one of the Ghost Squadron's horses again. Look at those muscle lines. That's Lieutenant Harrison's work. He always trained them to hide their true nature until the moment of need." Cole nodded slightly at Wade's words. Lieutenant Harrison was A good man. One of the first to notice something wasn't right with Morrison's operations. Started keeping records, tracking suspicious patterns in military supply shipments. Why did they target the Ghost Squadron? Wade asked, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. Morrison couldn't risk Harrison's evidence reaching Fort Laramie, Cole confirmed. Phoenix Valley was supposed to eliminate everyone who knew about the corruption. Clean slate. Thunder's ears swiveled, tracking movement as more. Riders approached from the east. These weren't federal agents or Morrison's men. They were Army cavalry, their uniforms marking them as members of an elite unit. Captain James Reynolds, commanding officer of Fort Laramie's investigative division, dismounted smoothly. Marshal, Cole, been a long time since Phoenix Valley. Had to be, Cole replied. Morrison's network went deeper than anyone suspected. Military contracts, land grants, judicial appointments, all connected through a web of corruption that took years to unravel. Reynolds approached Thunder with professional appreciation. So this is the famous Shadow Runner that got you out. The breeding program's classified records listed him as Thunder's Ghost, said he could outrun Apache war parties and move silently as death when needed. Name fit him better than they knew, Cole said quietly. After Phoenix Valley, we became ghosts together, watching, gathering evidence, waiting for Morrison to make a mistake. Crane, seeing his options dwindling, tried one last desperate gambit. You're all fools. Morrison's organization can't be stopped by one marshal and his trick horse. We've got judges, bankers, territorial officials. Had them, Reynolds corrected. While you were focused on this race, military police were moving in across 3 territories. Morrison's entire network is being dismantled as we speak. Beth Cooper moved closer to Thunder, her trained eye noting more details. The way he's been disguised, the deliberately dulled coat, the altered gait, that's Lieutenant Harrison's advanced concealment techniques. He only taught those methods to his most trusted handlers. Harrison knew something was coming, Cole explained. Week before Phoenix Valley, he gave me Thunder's specialized training records, said if anything happened to him, Thunder would know what to do. Horse saved more than just my life that day. He preserved the evidence that would eventually bring down Morrison's entire operation. Thunder's attention suddenly focused on the livery stable. Moments later, gunshots erupted as the Pierce brothers made one last attempt to escape. But Thunder had already anticipated their move, positioning himself to cut off their route. The brothers' horses, expensive but unsuited for real combat, shied away from Thunder's challenging stance. The Shadowrunner's training showed in every line of his body. This was a horse that had faced gunfire in Apache territory, that had carried dispatches through enemy lines when normal mounts would have faltered. "Stand down!" Reynolds commanded, his cavalry unit moving to surround the area. "It's over! Morrison signed a full confession!" The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Redemption Springs' main street as the Pierce brothers finally surrendered. Federal agents moved in to secure prisoners and gather evidence, while Captain Reynolds' men established a secure perimeter. Rebecca Sawyer approached Cole, who was checking Thunder for any injuries from the race and subsequent chaos. "All this time," she said quietly, "you were building a case against the biggest criminal organization in the territories. Why Redemption Springs? Why this race?" Cole patted Thunder's neck, the gesture containing years of shared experience. Towns. At a crossroads. Major trading routes, new railroad survey lines. Morrison's organization needed it as a base for their next phase of operations. They sent Crane to set things up, just like they'd done in other towns. But they didn't expect to find a ghost, Wade added, understanding dawning in his eyes. A marshal everyone thought was dead, riding a horse that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Thunder shifted slightly, his movement drawing attention to something hidden in his specially modified saddle. Cole reached into a concealed compartment and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Harrison's complete records," he explained. "Evidence of every crime Morrison's organization committed, every official they bribed, every operation they planned." Thunder's been carrying it for 15 years, right under their noses. They were so busy laughing at an old horse, they never realized they were being hunted. Captain Reynolds examined the documents with growing amazement. This is incredible. Military supply contracts, land grant forgeries, judicial bribes, Morrison's entire criminal empire, documented in detail. Lieutenant Harrison's final report. Harrison knew they were coming for him, Cole said softly, made sure the evidence would survive, even if he didn't. Thunder was his insurance policy, a horse trained to recognize certain people, to understand complex missions, to carry crucial intelligence undetected. The Shadow Runner stood quietly now, his deception no longer necessary. The afternoon light revealed more subtle details of his breeding and training, the powerful muscles that had been carefully disguised, the intelligent eyes that had assessed threats and opportunities through 15 years of undercover work. Thunder had carried more than just a marshal through those years. He'd carried the hope of justice, the weight of Harrison's final mission, and the key to dismantling a criminal empire that had thought itself untouchable. The race was over. But Thunder's true victory wasn't about speed or endurance. It was about patience, about a horse and rider who had learned to be underestimated, who had turned mockery into a weapon and used their enemy's arrogance against them. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Thunder stood ready for whatever came next. The ghost of Phoenix Valley had completed its mission, but there would always be more justice to pursue, more wrongs to right. And somewhere, Cole knew, Lieutenant Harrison would be proud of the horse that had carried his last mission home. Evening shadows crept across Redemption Springs as federal agents processed the arrested conspirators, but the calm was deceptive. Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, detecting something beyond human hearing. Cole noticed his mount's alertness immediately. 15 years of partnership had taught him to trust the horse's instincts. "Something's coming," he murmured to Captain Reynolds. "Thunder's picking up riders, lots of them." A dust cloud appeared, on the horizon, growing larger by the minute. Through his spyglass, Reynolds counted at least 20 mounted men approaching fast. Their riding style marked them as professionals, not common bandits, but trained cavalry. "Morrison's private army," Crane called out from where he was being held. His smirk had returned. "Did you really think a few federal agents could stop an operation this big?" Cole exchanged glances with Reynolds. This wasn't just a desperate rescue attempt. It was a calculated move to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Thunder shifted beneath him, muscles tensing as the horse assessed the approaching threat. "Get those documents to Fort Laramie," Cole ordered, handing the leather portfolio to Reynolds. "Thunder and I will buy you time." "That's suicide," Beth Cooper protested. "Even a shadow runner can't outmaneuver 20 experienced riders." "Won't know until we try," Cole replied quietly. He turned to Sheriff Ward. "Get your people under cover. This is about to get complicated." Thunder moved without prompting, positioning himself for what was to come. The horse's stance had changed again, no longer the tired old nag, nor even the powerful runner from the race. This was the war horse that had carried Cole through some of the bloodiest fights in territorial history. Marcus Wade stepped forward, his cavalry experience showing in his bearing. "Those riders, they're using standard military formations. Someone's trained them properly." "Colonel Richard Hawthorne," Reynolds confirmed grimly. "Morrison's personal enforcer. Dishonorably discharged 5 years ago for selling military secrets, but his tactical knowledge makes him dangerous." The approaching riders split into smaller groups, moving to surround the town. Their coordination confirmed Wade's assessment. These weren't common mercenaries, but a well-trained fighting force. "Get everyone into the stone buildings," Cole instructed Ward. "Hawthorne's men will have incendiary ammunition. They'll try to burn us out." Thunder's muscles bunched beneath Cole as the horse anticipated their next move. Years of combat experience had taught the Shadow Runner to read situations as well as any human strategist. "What's your play, Marshal?" Reynolds asked, recognizing the look in Cole's eyes. "Thunder and I know these hills better than they do. We'll draw their main force away, give you time to get those documents to safety." Cole checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Besides, Hawthorne and I have unfinished business from Phoenix Valley." Beth Cooper's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Hawthorne was there, wasn't he? He helped plan the ambush." "Led it personally," Cole confirmed. "Thunder never forgets a scent, and Hawthorne's was all over that valley after the shooting stopped. The first shots cracked across the evening air. Precise and targeted. These weren't warning shots. Hawthorne's men were aiming to kill. Thunder reacted instantly, moving before Cole needed to guide him. The horses' combat training showed in every fluid motion as they took cover behind the sturdy walls of the telegraph office. "Those documents have to reach Fort Laramie," Cole called to Reynolds. "Everything we've worked for, everything Harrison died for. It's all in that portfolio." Samuel Chase emerged from the telegraph office, his young face determined. "Just got a message through to Fort Apache. Cavalry reinforcements are coming, but they're 4 hours out." "We won't have 4 hours," Wade observed grimly. "Hawthorne's men are setting up for a systematic assault. They'll have this place surrounded in minutes." Thunder's ears swiveled, tracking multiple threats. The horses' specialized training was fully evident now. This wasn't just about speed or endurance, but about combat intelligence honed through years of warfare. Rebecca Sawyer appeared with her father's old Spencer rifle. "The general store has a cellar entrance that connects to the old mining tunnels. We can evacuate the townspeople that way." Cole nodded approval. "Good thinking. Ward, get your deputies to coordinate the evacuation. Anyone who can't fight needs to be underground before Hawthorne makes his main push." Thunder shifted position slightly, and Cole understood immediately. The horse had spotted something others had missed, a pattern in the attackers' movement suggesting their real strategy. "They're not just here to stop the documents from reaching Fort Laramie," Cole announced. "This is a purge operation. They'll try to eliminate everyone who knows about Morrison's organization, burn the town to hide the evidence." "Standard Phoenix Valley Protocol," Reynolds agreed grimly. "Leave no witnesses, no trace of what really happened." Thunder's muscles tensed as more riders appeared from the gathering darkness. The horses' war-trained senses detected details humans might miss, the subtle sounds of men moving into position, the smell of gun oil, and nervous horses. "Time to move," Cole said quietly. "Thunder and I will create a distraction. Reynolds, you take the documents north through Carson's Pass. Wade, your cavalry experience makes you the best choice to guide the townspeople through those mining tunnels." Beth Cooper stepped forward. "I'm staying. My father trained horses for the Ghost Squadron. I know their capabilities. You'll need someone who understands Thunder's signals if things go wrong." The evening wind carried the smell of smoke. Hawthorne's men had started fires at the town's perimeter, trying to force them into a smaller area. Thunder remained steady, his powerful frame radiating controlled energy as he awaited Cole's signal. "Remember Phoenix Valley," Cole told Reynolds as the captain prepared to ride. "Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight the battle they expect. Sometimes you have to change the rules entirely." Thunder's ears pricked forward again, and Cole smiled slightly. The horse had already anticipated their next move, reading his rider's intentions through years of partnership. "They're watching all the obvious escape routes," Cole continued, "expecting us to run, to react. But Thunder isn't just a war horse or a shadow runner. He's a living piece of military history, trained by the best cavalry minds in the territory. And tonight he's going to remind everyone why Morrison's men feared the Ghost Squadron." The first flames began to spread, casting wild shadows across Redemption Springs' main street. But in the growing chaos, a legend was about to ride again. Thunder and Cole had spent 15 years playing a role, letting themselves be underestimated. That deception was over. Now it was time to show why some horses earned their names in battle and why some legends never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to reveal their true nature. Thunder's head lifted suddenly, catching a scent on the wind that made his nostrils flare. Cole felt the change in his mount's demeanor instantly. Something specific had caught the warhorse's attention. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, trusting the animal's combat-honed senses. Beth Cooper moved closer, her trained eye noting Thunder's reaction. "That's a Ghost Squadron alert posture. They were taught to recognize specific threat signatures, gunpowder combinations, equipment patterns." "Dynamite," Cole confirmed grimly. "Hawthorne's brought mining explosives. He's not just planning to burn the town. He wants to collapse those escape tunnels." Lightning flickered in the distance, promising a storm that would complicate matters further. Thunder remained focused, his powerful muscles ready for action. The horses specialized. Training included operating in adverse weather conditions, another skill that had saved lives during the Apache Wars. "There's something else you should know," Beth added, her voice dropping lower. "Before my father died, he mentioned a hidden Ghost Squadron supply cache in these hills. Emergency provisions, ammunition, medical supplies, everything a unit would need if standard support lines were compromised." Cole's eyes narrowed with interest. Harrison never mentioned a cache. It was compartmentalized information. Each trainer only knew specific details. "My father handled the terrain adaptation protocols. He mapped all the secure fallback positions." She pulled out a worn piece of paper. "I've kept his notes, thinking someday they might matter." Thunder's ears pricked forward at voices carrying, from the darkness, Hawthorne's men coordinating their positions. The horse's combat experience showed in how he automatically positioned himself to shield their conversation from hostile observation. Samuel Chase emerged from the telegraph office again, his face pale. "Last message from Fort Apache. The cavalry. Relief force has been delayed. Hawthorne's men sabotaged the railroad bridge at Snake River Crossing. They're isolating us," Wade observed, "cutting off all potential support." A sharp crack split the air as the first charges detonated on the town's outskirts. Hawthorne's men were systematically destroying water towers and grain silos, eliminating resources that could sustain a prolonged defense. "We're not thinking about this right," Cole said suddenly. "They expect us to react defensively, to focus on protecting the town. That's exactly what happened at Phoenix Valley. They forced us to concentrate our forces, made us predictable." Thunder shifted slightly, and Cole nodded in agreement with whatever signal the horse had given. "Beth, those cache locations, how many are within riding distance?" She consulted her father's notes. 3, the nearest is in Cathedral Rock, about 5 miles north. It's the smallest, but they won't be watching it," Cole finished. "They'll focus on the obvious routes to Fort Laramie and Fort Apache. Nobody would expect us to ride deeper into hostile territory." Reynolds understood immediately. "Split their forces, make them chase shadows while the real objective slips through." Thunder's muscles tensed beneath Cole as another explosion lit up the night sky. The horse's war-trained instincts were already calculating paths through the chaos, planning routes that would confuse pursuit. "Your father's notes?" Cole asked. "Beth, do they mention any specific Ghost Squadron protocols, emergency signals or recognition codes?" She nodded, pointing to symbols scratched in the margin. "These marking patterns, they're trail signs. The squadron used them to coordinate separated units, guide them to rendezvous points." Wade studied the markings with growing excitement. "I remember these. We used similar signs during the Apache campaigns. Marks that look like random trail damage, but carry specific meanings to trained observers." Thunder's head turned sharply as more riders appeared on the town's western edge. The horses' acute senses had detected something about their movement that set them apart from Hawthorne's other men. "Those aren't mercenaries," Cole observed. "Their horses are moving too quietly, too controlled. Former Ghost Squadron mounts." "Has to be," Beth confirmed. "The breeding program produced about 50 horses before Morrison shut it down. Some disappeared after Phoenix Valley. Everyone assumed they'd been killed or sold off. Thunder's ears flicked forward with obvious interest. The warhorse recognized something familiar in the new arrivals' movement patterns. Harrison had contingency plans within contingency plans, Cole mused. What if some of those missing horses and riders didn't just disappear? What if they went underground, waiting for the right moment? The implications sent a surge of hope through the defenders. If other Ghost Squadron survivors were out there, if Harrison had prepared for even this possibility. Thunder shifted his weight, suggesting an idea to his rider. Cole smiled slightly, understanding the horse's intention. Beth, your father's notes. Any mention of the squadron's emergency rally signals? She flipped through the worn pages. Here, a specific whistle pattern, combined with certain hoof strikes. It was designed to carry over long distances without alerting hostile forces. Cole nodded. Thunder knows those signals. If there are any squadron survivors out there, any of Harrison's old contingency plans still in play, they'll recognize his call. The warhorse stood perfectly still, awaiting his rider's command. 15 years of playing a tired old nag had led to this moment, a chance to summon whatever remained of the legendary unit that Morrison had tried to destroy. As lightning continued to flash across the darkening sky, Thunder prepared to send a message that only certain ears would understand. The ghost of Phoenix Valley was about to call out to other ghosts, and Hawthorne's carefully planned assault would face something he couldn't have anticipated. The legend of the Ghost Squadron was about to ride again, and this time they wouldn't be the ones caught in an ambush. The mountain air grew heavier as thunder rolled across Thunder Ridge Valley. Cole guided his mount to higher ground, positioning them where sound would carry best. Thunder understood his task instinctively, years of specialized training coming to the fore. Remember how Harrison taught them, Beth said softly, consulting her father's notes. 3 distinct patterns, one for alert, one for location, one for intent. Thunder's first call pierced the darkness, a combination of precise hoof strikes and vocal signals that seemed natural to untrained ears, but carried specific meaning to those who knew. The sound echoed off canyon walls, traveling further than normal whistles could reach. For several long moments, only the rumble of distant thunder answered. Then, faintly at first but growing stronger, came a response from the western ridgeline, another from the north, 2 more from scattered positions among the hills. 4 units! Wade counted, his cavalry experience letting him pinpoint the sources, positioned to surround Hawthorne's forces if they coordinate properly. Cole felt Thunder's muscles bunch with anticipation. The warhorse recognized the responding signals, other squadron mounts acknowledging his call. Beth's eyes widened as she decoded the meaning behind each response. They're using advanced squadron protocols, she reported. Position confirmations, unit strengths. These aren't just survivors, Marshal. This is an organized resistance force. Lightning illuminated the valley briefly, revealing glimpses of riders moving through the darkness. Their horses moved with the same precise control as Thunder, showing the distinctive training of Harrison's program. Samuel Chase appeared again, breathless from running. Marshal, just intercepted a wire meant for Hawthorne. Morrison's organization, they're not just collapsing, they're splintering. Different factions fighting for control. Power vacuum, Cole nodded. Morrison's arrest triggered exactly what Harrison predicted: internal warfare between competing lieutenants. That's why Hawthorne's moving so aggressively. He's not just trying to silence witnesses, he's eliminating rivals for control. Thunder's ears swiveled, tracking multiple approaching signals. The squadron survivors were closing in, using their mount's specialized abilities to move undetected through Hawthorne's security perimeter. A rider materialized from the darkness, a woman wearing the distinctive leather gear of a squadron scout. Her horse, a gray stallion with similar breeding to Thunder, moved with the same fluid grace. Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood, she introduced herself. Harrison recruited me personally for the squadron's intelligence division. We've been monitoring Morrison's organization since Phoenix Valley, waiting for the right moment to strike. Cole studied her carefully. Harrison never mentioned an intelligence division. He wouldn't have, Sarah replied. After the first betrayals, he compartmentalized everything. Different units had different missions, different pieces of the larger plan. Only when everything aligned would the full strategy become clear. Thunder greeted Sarah's mount with quiet recognition, another squadron horse acknowledging one of its own. Beth consulted her father's notes again, finding confirmation of Sarah's story in the margins. The breeding program, Beth realized. It wasn't just about creating superior mounts. Harrison was building an autonomous unit that could operate independently if the regular command structure was compromised. 50 horses, Sarah confirmed, each trained for specific missions, each carrying part of Harrison's master plan. When Morrison struck at Phoenix Valley, he thought he was eliminating a threat. Instead, he scattered the pieces of his own downfall across the territory. More riders emerged from the darkness, each mounted on horses that shared Thunder's distinctive breeding. Their gear showed signs of long use, but their weapons and equipment were well maintained. Captain Michael Reeves, the next rider, introduced himself. Squadron Weapons Specialist. My unit's been stockpiling arms and ammunition, preparing for exactly this scenario. Lieutenant David Foster, another added, communications and logistics. We've established a network of safe houses and supply lines throughout the territory. Thunder's posture shifted slightly as he assessed the new arrivals, and Cole noticed something interesting. Each squadron horse displayed similar training to his mount, but with subtle specializations, some bred for speed, others for stealth, each optimized for their unit's specific mission. Harrison didn't just create a cavalry unit, Cole mused. He built a complete shadow operation, designed to survive its own destruction and rebuild from scattered elements. Sarah nodded. Morrison thought Phoenix Valley was a victory. He never realized he was actually triggering Harrison's contingency plan. Each surviving unit had specific instructions: gather intelligence, establish resources, and wait for the signal. Thunder's signal, Beth added, understanding dawning. That's why his role was so crucial. As one of the few horses that survived the actual ambush, his call would be recognized as authentic. Lightning flashed again, revealing more squadron. Riders moving into position around Redemption Springs. Hawthorne's forces, focused on the town, hadn't detected the noose slowly tightening around them. We've got allegations of wider corruption coming in from across the territory, Samuel reported, returning with more Telegraph transcripts. Morrison's arrest broke whatever control they had over local officials. People are starting to talk. Time to move, Sarah decided. Hawthorne's men are preparing for their main assault. They'll expect the town's defenders to be concentrated around the obvious strong points. Instead, Cole smiled slightly. They'll find themselves caught between squadron units they didn't even know existed. Thunder shifted beneath him, sensing the approaching confrontation. The war horse's muscles tensed with controlled energy, ready to demonstrate why Harrison's breeding program had produced the finest combat mounts in military history. Harrison's final victory, Sarah said quietly. Everything Morrison built, torn down by the very unit he thought he'd destroyed. Phoenix Valley wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a much longer operation. The night wind carried the rumble of distant thunder, but now it also carried something else, the subtle sounds of squadron horses moving into attack positions, preparing to reveal why some legends refused to die. They were no longer just ghosts, haunting Morrison's organization. They were the architects of its destruction, and Hawthorne was about to learn why the Ghost Squadron's reputation had once struck fear into the hearts of the territory's most hardened outlaws. The storm was about to break, and with it 15 years of careful planning would finally bear fruit. Thunder and his fellow squadron mounts stood ready, their true nature about to be demonstrated in a way that would be remembered for generations. The legend of Harrison's Ghost Squadron was riding again, and this time they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to finish what their commander had started, a complete cleansing of the corruption that had poisoned the territory for too long. Captain Reeves unrolled a detailed map across a fallen log, its corners weighted with stones against the rising wind. The parchment showed markings only squadron members would understand: cache locations, patrol routes, and intelligence gathering, points established over 15 years of patient preparation. Each squadron unit maintained separate observation posts, he explained, pointing to specific locations. We monitored key routes, documented suspicious movements, tracked patterns that seemed random but formed part of a larger picture. Thunder's attention shifted to the eastern ridge, where more riders were taking position. Their horses moved with the characteristic precision of squadron mounts, each step calculated to minimize noise and visibility. Harrison's genius wasn't just in breeding superior horses, Beth observed, studying the map. He created a complete intelligence network disguised as a cavalry unit. The horses were both transportation and cover. Who would suspect military-grade surveillance operations hidden behind a specialized breeding program? Lieutenant Foster nodded approval. The horses provided perfect deniability. If any of us were spotted, we appeared to be nothing more than riders exercising valuable mounts. Meanwhile, we were mapping Morrison's entire operation piece by piece. Sarah traced a series of intersecting lines on the map. These markings show money trails, gold shipments that disappeared, payoffs disguised as legitimate transactions. Harrison had us track every detail, building a complete picture of the corruption. A flash of lightning revealed more squadron units moving into predetermined positions. Their horses displayed the same controlled power as Thunder, each animal a testament to Harrison's revolutionary breeding and training methods. The squadron wasn't just about combat effectiveness, Wade realized, his cavalry experience helping him understand the fuller implications. Harrison was creating a new kind of military unit, one that could operate independently, gather intelligence, and coordinate complex operations without central command. Cole felt thunder shift beneath him, the horse detecting something beyond human perception. Moments later, a distinctive pattern of hoof strikes carried through the darkness. Another squadron signal. That's Marcus Chen's unit, Sarah identified, our infiltration specialist. His team focused on placing observers inside Morrison's organization, gathering evidence from the inside. A rider approached, his mount moving with ghost-like silence. Marcus Chen's features showed Asian ancestry, but his gear and bearing marked him as pure squadron. His horse, a midnight black stallion, shared Thunder's powerful build, but moved with extraordinary stealth. Hawthorne's getting nervous, Chen reported. His men are picking up signs of movement, but can't identify the sources. The Shadow Runner. Training is working. They can't distinguish our horses from natural night sounds. Thunder acknowledged Chen's mount with a quiet nickering, a greeting between squadron horses that carried coded meaning. Beth's eyes widened as she decoded the exchange. They're sharing tactical information, she explained. Harrison incorporated specific vocalizations into their training. The horses can communicate threat assessments and position data without human commands. Samuel Chase emerged from the shadows, moving carefully to avoid drawing attention. New telegraph intercepts. Hawthorne sent urgent messages to 3 different locations, requesting reinforcements. He's starting to realize. Something's wrong, Sarah smiled grimly. But his reinforcements won't arrive in time. Squadron units have already disabled the major relay stations. His messages aren't reaching their destinations. Thunder's muscles tensed as more signals echoed across the valley. The Ghost Squadron was nearly in position, their trap almost complete. Each unit had specific objectives, coordinated through years of preparation and training. Harrison's final protocol, Chen added, retrieving a sealed document from his saddlebags. Instructions to be opened only when all squadron units were reunited. He called it Operation Phoenix, the complete exposure and dismantling of Morrison's empire. The document contained detailed plans, including evidence locations, witness lists, and banking records that would unravel decades of corruption. Harrison had predicted everything: the power struggle that would follow Morrison's arrest, Hawthorne's desperate attempt to seize control, even the specific location where the final confrontation would occur. Redemption Springs wasn't chosen by accident, Cole realized. The whole race, Crane's involvement, even Thunder's role in drawing attention, it was all designed to bring Hawthorne's forces here, to this exact spot. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the valley where squadron units had surrounded the town. Hawthorne's men, preparing for what they thought would be a simple assault, were about to face the full power of Harrison's legacy. Thunder raised his head, sensing the approaching moment. The war horse's muscles rippled with controlled energy, ready to demonstrate why the Ghost Squadron had once been considered the finest cavalry unit in military history. The storm was gathering strength, but an even more powerful force was about to be unleashed. Harrison's Ghost Squadron was reformed, their 15-year mission about to reach its climax. The legend that had begun in Phoenix Valley would end here, in Thunder Ridge Valley, where a supposedly old horse and his determined rider had helped orchestrate the most elaborate operation in territorial history. The ghost of Harrison's legacy was about to rise again, and this time there would be nowhere for corruption to hide. The storm broke over Thunder Ridge Valley with apocalyptic fury. Lightning split the sky as the first shots of the battle rang out. Thunder moved without hesitation, responding to Cole's subtle commands as years of combat training took over. Hawthorne's men had established defensive positions around Redemption Springs, expecting a straightforward assault. What they got instead was something from their worst nightmares: Ghost Squadron horses emerging from the darkness like vengeful spirits, their specialized training making them nearly invisible in the storm. "Contact on the western perimeter," Chen reported, his black stallion moving like a shadow through the chaos. Hawthorne's forward scouts are falling back exactly as planned. Thunder's muscles bunched as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The rain had turned the ground treacherous, but squadron horses were bred for precisely these conditions. Their sure-footed advance contrasted sharply with the struggling mounts of Hawthorne's mercenaries. "Delta unit, swing wide to the north," Sarah commanded through the tactical hand signals developed specifically for squadron operations. "Push them toward Dead Man's Gulch." Lieutenant Foster's team moved into position, their horses displaying the coordination that made the squadron legendary. Each mount responded to signals too subtle for observers to detect, creating patterns of movement that confused and disoriented their opponents. A massive explosion rocked the valley as Hawthorne's men detonated their first cache of mining charges. But Thunder had anticipated this, leading Cole clear of the blast radius before the sound even reached them. The war horse's combat instincts proved invaluable as more explosions followed. "They're trying to create chaos," Wade observed, his cavalry experience helping him read the battlefield. Standard tactic: use the explosions as cover for a coordinated push. This was another element of Harrison's strategy. The squadron horses' specialized training included detailed knowledge of terrain hazards. They naturally guided their riders away from dangerous ground while herding their opponents toward it. Beth's voice carried urgent warning. "Marshal, Hawthorne's men are moving explosives toward the town. They're going to try to level it." But Thunder had already detected this threat. The war horse's acute senses picked up the specific scent of mining charges, allowing him to direct Cole's attention to the danger before it could fully develop. "Chen, take your unit and intercept those charges," Cole commanded. "Sarah, provide covering fire. Keep them busy while we deal with Hawthorne." The battlefield became a symphony of coordinated movement as squadron units executed their orders with precision that would have made Harrison proud. Each horse seemed to anticipate its rider's needs, responding to situations sometimes faster than humans could process them. Thunder's power was fully unleashed now, his stride eating up the ground as he bore down on Hawthorne's position. The war horse's reputation had been built in countless engagements, but this night would add a new chapter to his legend. The storm continued to rage, but within its fury, justice was finally being served. The Ghost Squadron had risen from the ashes of Phoenix Valley, and this time they wouldn't be the ones caught in an ambush. This time they were the hunters, not the hunted, and Hawthorne was about to learn why some legends never truly die. They just wait for the perfect moment to reveal their full power. The battlefield dynamics shifted as Hawthorne's men attempted to regroup. Their mounted artillery positions faced unexpected challenges as squadron horses executed complex evasion patterns they'd never encountered before. Rain-slick terrain became another enemy as their standard military mounts struggled to maintain footing. "Northwest quadrant clear," Lieutenant Foster reported, his unit having systematically dismantled one of Hawthorne's strong points. "They've abandoned their heavy weapons, trying to consolidate around the creek crossing." Thunder's acute senses detected movement along the ridgeline, snipers attempting to establish elevated firing positions. The war horse's ears flicked in a specific pattern, alerting nearby squadron mounts to the threat. Their response was immediate and coordinated, each unit adjusting its position to minimize exposure while maintaining tactical advantage. Beth decoded more of her father's tactical notes as the battle unfolded. "These formations, they're not just for combat. Harrison designed them to psychologically impact the enemy. The way squadron horses move creates confusion, making it impossible to accurately gauge their numbers or predict their next position." The effectiveness of this strategy became apparent as Hawthorne's command structure showed signs of strain. Orders were confused, units moved at cross purposes, and their once coordinated defense began to fragment. "They're losing cohesion," Sarah observed, her grey stallion dancing through the chaos with fluid grace. "Standard military tactics don't work against squadron movements. Their training assumes predictable cavalry responses." Chen's black stallion materialized from the darkness, moving with impossible stealth despite the storm. Demolition charges secured, found documents with them, detailed plans for systematic destruction of every major building in town. They weren't just aiming to eliminate witnesses. Coordinated push. A group of Hawthorne's elite guards made a desperate push toward the town center, hoping to break through the squadron's encirclement. Their horses were quality stock, but they lacked the specialized breeding that made squadron mounts so effective. In combat conditions, Thunder's response was devastating in its precision. The warhorse led a countercharge that split the attacking force, his movements creating opportunities that other squadron units exploited instantly. The coordination between horses showed years of specialized training, each mount instinctively supporting the others. "Look at their footwork," Wade marveled, his cavalry experience letting him appreciate the technical brilliance. Every stride calculated, every position supporting multiple tactical options. Harrison didn't just breed better horses, he created a whole new approach to mounted combat. Lightning revealed glimpses of the squadron's effectiveness. Hawthorne's men found themselves constantly wrong-footed, their traditional military responses rendered useless against horses that seemed to anticipate their every move. The rain-soaked battlefield became an extension of squadron strategy, their mounts using the adverse conditions to maximum advantage. Samuel Chase arrived with fresh intelligence, having monitored telegraph traffic throughout the engagement. Hawthorne's reinforcements are being delayed by washouts along the access roads, the storms working in our favor. Not just the storm, Beth interjected. Squadron units specifically targeted key crossing points earlier today, weakening structural support. They knew this weather was coming and used it as part of their tactical planning. Thunder's ears pricked forward as distant explosions marked the failure of another of Hawthorne's initiatives. The Warhorse's combat experience showed in how he automatically adjusted his position to cover potential retreat routes, anticipating the enemy's likely responses. Sarah's unit reported success in the eastern sector, having systematically eliminated Hawthorne's observation posts. The squadron's ability to operate effectively in darkness and adverse weather conditions proved decisive, their specialized training negating traditional military advantages. "They're falling back to secondary positions," Chen observed, his stallion moving like liquid shadow through the battlefield. "But something's wrong with their pattern. This isn't a standard tactical retreat." Thunder's muscles tensed beneath Cole, the Warhorse detecting the same anomaly. Years of combat experience had taught both horse and rider to recognize when something didn't fit expected patterns. The answer came in a series of coordinated explosions along the creek bank, larger than anything Hawthorne's men had used previously. The blasts were precisely placed to trigger a cascade effect, threatening to cut off squadron units from each other. But Harrison had trained his horses for exactly such contingencies. Squadron mounts responded instantly to the changing terrain, their movements adapting to new tactical realities faster than any human commander could have coordinated. Thunder led the squadron's response, his powerful stride carrying him through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. Other units followed his lead, turning what should have been a devastating setback into another demonstration of their superior training and capabilities. The battle was reaching its climax, but the Ghost Squadron's greatest test still lay ahead. Hawthorne had one final card to play, and Thunder would need every ounce of his legendary ability to ensure that justice, delayed for 15 years, would finally be served. The storm continued its fury, but within its chaos, legends were being rewritten and old debts were about to be paid in full. The storm's intensity doubled, turning Thunder Ridge Valley into a maelstrom of wind and rain. Through the chaos, Hawthorne's voice carried a note of triumph that made Cole instantly wary. "You think you've won, Marshal?" The words cut through the storm's fury. "You have no idea what's really at stake here." Thunder's muscles coiled as signals from other squadron horses carried warnings. Chen's black stallion emerged from the darkness, his rider's expression grave. "Marshal, we've got trouble. Just intercepted a courier. Hawthorne wasn't just Morrison's enforcer. He's been working with foreign interests, selling military secrets and squadron breeding records to the highest bidders." Sarah's grey stallion materialized beside them, steam rising from his rain-soaked coat. "That explains the international banking transactions we've been tracking. Morrison's organization was just the surface layer. The real operation goes deeper." Thunder's ears pricked forward as new riders approached from the north, their horses moving with a precision that seemed oddly familiar. Beth studied them through her father's spyglass, her breath catching. Those are squadron offspring, she realized. Second-generation breeds, probably from mares that disappeared after Phoenix Valley. Someone's been continuing Harrison's program, but with modifications. Cole felt Thunder tense beneath him, the Warhorse recognizing something about the approaching mounts that set them apart. Their movement patterns showed squadron training, but with an aggressive edge that Harrison would never have approved. "They've corrupted the breeding program," Sarah concluded grimly, "taken Harrison's work and twisted it into something else. These horses are trained for pure combat, stripped of the intelligence gathering and strategic capabilities that made the squadron special." Lieutenant Foster's voice carried urgent warning through the storm. More riders coming in from the east, same modified breeding characteristics. They're using pincer movement patterns, but the coordination's off. These mounts lack the squadron's advanced tactical training. Thunder shifted position, his combat experience helping him analyze the new threat. The approaching horses might share his bloodline, but they lacked the deeper understanding that made squadron mounts so effective. That's why Hawthorne's really here, Cole realized. The race, the documents, even Morrison's arrest, they're all secondary. He's after Thunder's breeding records. The last pure squadron stallion, carrying Harrison's complete genetic program. Beth consulted her father's notes frantically. There's something here about genetic markers, specific traits Harrison built into the original bloodline. He designed safeguards into the breeding program, features that couldn't be replicated without access to the primary bloodstock. Thunder's muscles bunched as he assessed the modified squadron mounts. Their raw power was impressive, but they moved with an artificial precision that lacked the true squadron's fluid adaptability. They're trying to create their own cavalry units, Wade observed, selling the technology to foreign militaries. But without Thunder's genetic markers, without Harrison's complete program, they can only produce pale imitations. Chen's black stallion detected movement from another quarter. Third group approaching from the south. Different riding styles. Professional military, probably foreign observers here to evaluate the breeding program's effectiveness. The battlefield dynamics shifted as Hawthorne's modified squadron mounts engaged. Their aggressive training showed in how they charged directly into combat, lacking the tactical sophistication that made the original squadron so effective. Thunder's response demonstrated the difference. The warhorse adapted instantly to the changing situation, his movements creating opportunities for other squadron units to exploit. Years of specialized training showed how he anticipated threats, processed tactical information, and coordinated with other mounts. Look at the difference in their cognitive patterns, Beth noted, watching the engagement unfold. Hawthorne's horses are powerful, but they're basically just well-trained cavalry mounts. They can't match the squadron's true capabilities. Sarah's unit reported more findings as they secured Hawthorne's command post. Documents here about international sales, breeding contracts with foreign governments. They've been promising to deliver squadron-level mounts, but without Thunder's bloodline, they can't fulfill those agreements. The storm's fury matched the intensity of the battle as Thunder led the original squadron horses against their modified counterparts. The difference in training became increasingly apparent. Hawthorne's mounts relied on brute force and drilled responses, while squadron horses displayed the adaptive intelligence that made Harrison's program revolutionary. That's why they need him alive, Cole said quietly, feeling Thunder's muscles shift beneath him. They can't just kill him and take genetic samples. They need his complete breeding profile, his training responses, everything that makes him unique. Thunder's ears flicked forward as Hawthorne himself finally appeared, mounted on a horse that showed clear squadron bloodline influence. But something was wrong with the animal's movements. Its responses were mechanical, lacking the natural flow that characterized true squadron mounts. "You still don't understand, do you, Cole?" Hawthorne called through the storm. "Morrison was nothing, a petty criminal playing at power. We're building something bigger. An international network of military contracts, specialized cavalry units, for sale to the highest bidder. All we need is your horse's bloodline to perfect the program." Thunder's response was instantaneous, a complex series of signals that other squadron horses immediately understood. The original units began moving in patterns that confused and disoriented their modified counterparts, demonstrating the true depth of Harrison's training protocols. The battle was entering a new phase, one that would determine not just the fate of Redemption Springs, but the future of Harrison's legacy. Thunder stood ready, the last pure squadron stallion, preparing to defend everything his breed represented. The storm raged on, but an even greater fury was about to be unleashed as 15 years of planning reached its final decisive moment. Samuel, Chase burst from the telegraph office, clutching a stack of decoded messages. "Marshal, these aren't just military contracts. They've been establishing breeding facilities across Europe and Asia. Each one promised squadron-quality mounts within 5 years." Impossible timelines, Beth analyzed, her knowledge of the breeding program revealing the deception. Harrison spent decades developing the genetic traits that make Thunder unique. You can't replicate that work in 5 years, not without access to the original bloodline. Thunder's senses detected movement in the upper valley. More modified squadron offspring approaching, their movements showing the flaws in Hawthorne's accelerated training program. The war horse's muscles tensed as he evaluated this new threat. Their breeding facility in Prussia, Sarah reported, examining captured documents. They've been trying to recreate Harrison's results through selective breeding. But something's missing. Their horses show physical capabilities but lack the cognitive development that makes squadron mounts special. Lieutenant Foster's team discovered additional evidence in Hawthorne's saddlebags. International banking drafts, contracts with foreign military attachés. They've taken deposits from at least 6 different governments, all expecting delivery of squadron-quality mounts within the year. Thunder's ears swiveled as he processed battlefield information that human observers might miss. The modified mounts showed impressive physical attributes, but their tactical responses remained basic, lacking the advanced problem-solving abilities that characterized true squadron horses. Harrison built more than just superior cavalry mounts, Beth explained, decoding more of her father's notes. The squadron breeding program incorporated specific cognitive traits: intelligence, adaptability, tactical awareness. Without those elements, you've just got very fast, very strong horses. Wade studied the modified mount's movement patterns with professional interest. They're trying to compensate with intensive drilling, but it's surface level. These horses can execute complex maneuvers, but can't adapt when situations change. They lack the squadron's tactical flexibility. Thunder demonstrated this difference as he led another coordinated response to Hawthorne's forces. His movements created opportunities that other squadron horses instinctively recognized and exploited, their collective actions showing levels of coordination that the modified mounts couldn't match. "The foreign observers are pulling back," Chen reported, his black stallion moving silently through the chaos. "They're starting to realize these modified breeds can't deliver what Hawthorne promised. The whole international operation is at risk of exposure." Documents scattered by the storm revealed the full scope of Hawthorne's ambitions. He hadn't just been selling Morrison's secrets, he'd been marketing a corrupted version of Harrison's legacy, promising military superiority to anyone who could pay his price. Thunder's muscles bunched as he processed new tactical information. The war horse's specialized training allowed him to identify patterns in enemy movement that suggested another layer of deception unfolding. These aren't just training facilities, Sarah realized, examining a coded map found among Hawthorne's papers. They're building a network of strategic military positions, using the breeding program as cover. Each facility is positioned near critical transportation routes, communication centers, a perfect infrastructure for international espionage, Cole concluded. The horse breeding operation masks their real purpose. They're establishing forward bases disguised as cavalry training centers. Thunder's alert posture warned of approaching danger moments before new explosions rocked the valley. Hawthorne's forces had been herding them toward this moment, using the modified squadron mounts as cover for their true objective. They're not just after Thunder's bloodline, Beth understood. Suddenly, they want the squadron's complete tactical database, all the specialized training protocols, the cognitive development programs, everything that makes these horses unique. The battle's stakes had risen beyond anything they'd initially imagined. This wasn't just about Morrison's corruption or even military secrets. It was about preventing Harrison's revolutionary work from being corrupted into something he'd never intended, a tool for international espionage and military dominance. Thunder stood steady in the storm, the last pure squadron stallion, facing twisted reflections of his own bloodline. The war horse's presence represented everything Harrison had worked to create, not just superior physical capabilities, but the perfect synthesis of equine intelligence and specialized training. The future of military cavalry operations hung in the balance, and Thunder's genetic legacy would determine whether that future served justice or corruption. The storm raged on, but an even greater conflict was about to reach its climax. The storm's intensity forced both sides to regroup, creating a momentary lull in the fighting. Thunder led the squadron units to a defensible position in the lee of Redemption Springs' old mining office, where the building's stone walls provided shelter from the worst of the weather. Sarah's grey stallion positioned himself beside Thunder, both horses communicating through subtle signals that spoke of shared combat experience. The rest of the squadron mounts arranged themselves in a protective formation that demonstrated their superior tactical awareness. Harrison had contingency plans for something like this, Beth revealed, studying a previously sealed section of her father's notes. He knew someone might try to corrupt the breeding program. That's why he incorporated specific genetic markers that can't be replicated without understanding their true purpose. Cole felt thunder shift beneath him, the warhorse processing this information in his own way. What kind of markers? Cognitive development triggers, Beth explained, specific traits that only activate under certain conditions. These modified mounts might share squadron bloodlines, but they're missing crucial elements of Harrison's work. Chen's black stallion emerged from his scouting run, moving with characteristic stealth despite the treacherous conditions. Hawthorne's forces are regrouping near the creek crossing. Their modified mounts are showing signs of strain. The accelerated training program has weaknesses we can exploit. Lieutenant Foster arrived with additional intelligence gathered from captured documents, found something interesting in Hawthorne's personal correspondence, references to Project Legacy. Apparently they've been collecting genetic material from every surviving squadron horse they could track down. Building a database, Wade theorized, his cavalry experience helping him understand the implications. Trying to reconstruct Harrison's breeding program piece by piece, but without understanding how all the elements work together, they're creating fragments, Beth finished. Horses with incredible physical capabilities, but lacking the advanced cognitive development that made the squadron special. Thunder's ears pricked forward as distant hoofbeats carried through the storm. The warhorse's acute senses detected something about the approaching riders that made him alert his fellow squadron mounts. Sarah studied the sound patterns. Those aren't Hawthorne's forces. Different movement rhythm, more coordinated, almost like genuine squadron training, Cole confirmed as new riders emerged from the darkness. Their horses showed the unmistakable characteristics of Harrison's program, but these weren't modified breeds. These were original squadron mounts, ones that had disappeared after Phoenix Valley. The lead rider dismounted smoothly, revealing an older man whose bearing spoke of military command experience. Captain James Reynolds, former squadron training officer. We've been monitoring Hawthorne's operation from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Thunder greeted the newcomers' horses with evident recognition. These were his true peers, mounts that shared not just his bloodline, but his complete training heritage. Their presence changed the tactical dynamics significantly. Harrison scattered us deliberately after Phoenix Valley, Reynolds explained. Different units with different missions, each carrying part of his master plan. Some went underground, others maintained deep cover positions, all of us watching, waiting for the signal that would bring us back together. Beth's hands trembled as she found confirmation in her father's notes. The breeding program wasn't just about creating superior horses. It was about establishing a network that could survive its own destruction and rebuild when needed. A self-repairing intelligence network, Sarah realized. The horses weren't just mounts. They were the key to maintaining operational continuity, even if the human command structure was compromised. Thunder's muscles tensed as more squadron horses arrived, each animal demonstrating the perfect blend of physical capability and advanced tactical awareness that made Harrison's program revolutionary. Their presence stood in stark contrast to Hawthorne's modified mounts, highlighting the difference between true squadron breeding and attempted imitation. "We've been gathering evidence about Hawthorne's international operations," Reynolds continued. "Military contracts, breeding facilities, strategic positioning of assets, everything pointing to a much larger conspiracy than anyone suspected." Lieutenant Foster examined maps that Reynolds provided, showing the full scope of Hawthorne's network. "These aren't just random locations. They're creating a web of influence, using the breeding program as cover for establishing military presence in key regions." Thunder's alert posture warned of approaching danger moments before new riders appeared on the ridgeline. But these weren't Hawthorne's forces. They were more squadron survivors, each mount showing the distinctive characteristics of Harrison's complete program. "Harrison knew this day would come," Reynolds said quietly. "Knew someone would try to corrupt his work, turn it into something he never intended. That's why he built in safeguards, features that can't be duplicated without understanding their true purpose." The storm's fury seemed to match the gravity of the moment as Thunder stood among his fellow squadron horses. Together, they represented everything Harrison had worked to create, not just physical excellence, but the perfect integration of equine intelligence and specialized training. The battle for Redemption Springs had evolved into something far more significant. It wasn't just about stopping Hawthorne or exposing Morrison's corruption. It was about preserving Harrison's true legacy and preventing his revolutionary work from being perverted into a tool for international dominance. Thunder's presence carried new weight as the last pure breeding stallion whose genetic profile contained all of Harrison's carefully designed traits. The warhorse's importance extended beyond his combat capabilities. He was the key to ensuring that squadron horses would continue to serve justice rather than corruption. The storm raged on, but within its chaos, a legendary unit was reforming. The Ghost Squadron was whole again, and this time they wouldn't just be fighting for survival, they would be fighting for the future itself. Marcus Wade stepped forward, his years of cavalry experience lending weight to his observations. "Look at how the original squadron horses communicate. It's not just basic signaling. They're sharing complex tactical assessments, coordinating responses without human input." Beth studied the interactions with growing understanding. The cognitive development wasn't random. Harrison built specific traits into the bloodline, problem-solving abilities, tactical awareness, even emotional intelligence. That's what Hawthorne's program couldn't replicate. Thunder demonstrated this advanced capability as he processed battlefield information, sharing vital intelligence with his fellow squadron mounts through subtle gestures and movements that spoke of years of specialized training. Each squadron horse was bred for specific mission profiles, Reynolds elaborated. Some specialized in stealth operations, others in tactical coordination or long-range reconnaissance. But they all shared core cognitive traits that made them adaptable to any situation. Sarah's gray stallion shifted position, maintaining perfect tactical awareness while communicating with other squadron mounts. That's why Hawthorne's modified. Breeds can't match their effectiveness. He focused on physical attributes without understanding the importance of cognitive development. Samuel Chase arrived with fresh intelligence from the telegraph office, just decoded messages about Hawthorne's breeding facilities in Europe. They're claiming successful replication of squadron capabilities, but their test results show significant performance gaps. Of course they do, Beth interjected, consulting previously sealed sections of her father's notes. Harrison incorporated developmental stages that can't be rushed. Trying to accelerate the process creates physical specimens without proper cognitive maturation. Thunder's ears swiveled as he detected movement beyond human perception. Other squadron horses responded instantly, their collective awareness creating an invisible web of surveillance around their position. Lieutenant Chen's black stallion materialized from another scouting run. Hawthorne's modified mounts are showing increasing signs of instability. The accelerated training program has created gaps in their behavioral development. That matches what we've observed at other facilities, Reynolds confirmed. Their attempts to replicate squadron capabilities without understanding the underlying principles have produced concerning results. Thunder's muscles tensed as he processed new tactical information. The warhorse's advanced training allowed him to identify patterns that suggested another layer of complexity in Hawthorne's operations. These international contracts, Foster noted, examining captured documents more closely. They're not just selling military capabilities, they're establishing a network of influential assets in strategic positions. Using the breeding program as cover, Sarah concluded, each facility becomes a forward operating base, perfectly positioned. For intelligence gathering and rapid response deployment, Beth uncovered additional details in her father's notes. Harrison anticipated this possibility. He built specific traits into the squadron bloodline that would resist misuse, cognitive elements that only fully develop under proper ethical training conditions. Thunder's alert posture warned of approaching danger moments before new signals carried across the storm-swept valley. But these weren't enemy movements. More squadron survivors were arriving, each mount displaying the distinctive characteristics that marked them as products of Harrison's complete program. What Hawthorne never understood, Reynolds explained, watching the gathering of squadron horses, was that Harrison wasn't just breeding superior mounts. He was creating partnerships, horses capable of true tactical collaboration with their riders. Wade studied the interactions between squadron mounts with professional appreciation. The level of coordination is extraordinary. They're not just responding to commands, they're actively participating in tactical decision-making. Thunder demonstrated this advanced capability as he shared critical battlefield intelligence with newly arrived squadron units. His decades of experience showed in how he processed and distributed tactical information, ensuring each mount understood its role in the developing situation. The storm's intensity seemed to match the gravity of the moment as the true scope of Harrison's legacy became clear. The Ghost Squadron wasn't just a military unit. It was a revolutionary approach to mounted operations, one that recognized horses as true partners rather than mere tools. Lightning illuminated the valley as more squadron survivors arrived, each animal demonstrating the perfect integration of physical capability and advanced cognitive development that made Harrison's program unique. Their presence stood in stark contrast to Hawthorne's modified mounts, highlighting the fundamental difference between true squadron breeding and attempted imitation. The battle for Redemption Springs had evolved into something far more significant than anyone had initially imagined. It wasn't just about stopping corrupt officials or exposing international conspiracies. It was about preserving a vision of partnership between human and horse that could change the future of mounted operations forever. Thunder stood among his fellow squadron horses, the last pure breeding stallion whose genetic profile contained all of Harrison's carefully designed traits. The warhorse's importance extended beyond combat capabilities. He represented a legacy of ethical development and true partnership that could never be corrupted into mere military advantage. The storm raged on, but within its fury, a legendary unit was reforming. The Ghost Squadron was whole again, and this time they would fight not just for survival, but for the very principles that had made them legendary. Lightning split the sky above Thunder Ridge Valley as the final confrontation approached. The reformed Ghost Squadron had taken strategic positions around Redemption Springs, their superior training evident in how seamlessly they controlled the battlefield. Hawthorne emerged from the storm's fury, mounted on his modified squadron horse. Behind him, his remaining forces formed an impressive but ultimately flawed battle line. Their mounts showed impressive physical capabilities but lacked the deeper understanding that made true squadron horses extraordinary. "One last chance, Cole," Hawthorne called across the rain-swept ground. "Think about what we could build together. With Thunder's bloodline, we could revolutionize military operations across the globe. Every major power would pay fortunes for what we could create." Thunder's response was subtle but clear, a slight shift in posture that other squadron horses immediately understood. The warhorse's decades of experience showed in how he assessed the tactical situation, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's position that humans might miss. "Harrison's legacy isn't for sale," Cole replied quietly. "The squadron was never meant to be a weapon. It was about partnership, about reaching a higher understanding between horse and rider." Beth's research had uncovered the final pieces of her father's notes. The cognitive development program wasn't just about creating smarter horses. It was about establishing true collaboration. Each mount was bred to be a partner, not just a tool. Thunder's muscles tensed as he detected movement in the darkness. Sarah's gray stallion responded instantly, positioning himself to counter the threat before it fully developed. Other squadron horses moved with similar precision, their coordinated actions demonstrating why Harrison's program had been revolutionary. "You're all fools," Hawthorne spat, "clinging to outdated ideals while the world changes around you. Modern warfare demands weapons, not partnerships." His modified mount shifted nervously, showing signs of the instability that plagued Hawthorne's accelerated breeding program. The horse's movements were powerful but mechanical, lacking the fluid grace that characterized true squadron training. Thunder's ears pricked forward as more signals carried through the storm. The last of the squadron survivors had arrived, completing their unit's reformation. Each mount displayed the perfect integration of physical capability and advanced cognitive development that made Harrison's program unique. "What you never understood," Reynolds called out, his years of squadron experience evident in his voice, "was that Harrison wasn't just creating superior cavalry horses. He was establishing a new paradigm, one where horses weren't just mounts, but full partners in the mission." Thunder demonstrated this truth as he coordinated with other squadron horses, their movements creating a tactical web that slowly constricted around Hawthorne's position. Each animal understood its role instinctively, years of specialized training, allowing them to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. "The breeding program's genetic markers," Beth explained, "they're not just about physical traits. Harrison incorporated specific cognitive triggers that only activate under proper ethical training conditions. You can't force or accelerate the development. It has to be earned through trust and partnership." Hawthorne's face twisted with fury as he realized his position was deteriorating. His modified mounts, despite their impressive physical capabilities, couldn't match the squadron's tactical sophistication. Their responses remained basic, lacking the advanced problem-solving abilities that made Harrison's program special. Thunder's muscles bunched as he prepared for what would come next. The warhorse's combat experience showed in how he anticipated the enemy's likely reactions, positioning himself to take advantage of their predictable responses. "Your time is over, Hawthorne," Cole said quietly. "The evidence of your international operations is already on its way to Fort Laramie. The network of breeding facilities, the military contracts, the strategic positioning of assets, it's all being exposed." Lightning illuminated the valley as thunder launched into motion, leading the squadron's final advance. The supposedly old horse moved with lethal grace, each stride placed with precision that made mockery of the treacherous conditions. Other squadron mounts followed his lead, their coordinated movements creating patterns that confused and disoriented. Their opponents, Hawthorne's modified mounts, began to falter as the strain of combat exposed fundamental flaws in their accelerated development. Without proper cognitive training, they couldn't adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. Their responses became increasingly mechanical, lacking the fluid intelligence that characterized true squadron horses. Thunder's signal rang out, 3 sharp sounds that carried coded instructions to his fellow squadron mounts. The response was immediate and devastating. Squadron units executed complex maneuvers that systematically dismantled Hawthorne's defensive positions, their superior training evident in every coordinated action. "This is what Harrison envisioned," Beth called out, watching the squadron's effectiveness. "Not just physical superiority, but true partnership between horse and rider. Each mount contributes its own intelligence and capabilities to the mission." Hawthorne's forces broke under the pressure, their modified mounts unable to maintain cohesion against the squadron's sophisticated tactics. The rain-soaked battlefield became a demonstration of why Harrison's complete program could never be replicated through shortcuts or corruption. Thunder moved with fluid grace as he approached Hawthorne's position, his powerful stride eating up the ground with deceptive ease. The warhorse's decades of experience showed in how he handled the treacherous conditions, each step placed with absolute certainty. "It's over," Cole announced, as squadron units surrounded their remaining opponents. "Harrison's legacy is secure. The squadron will continue as he intended, serving justice through true partnership, not dominance." The storm began to ease as dawn approached, its fury spent like the battle it had witnessed. Thunder stood among his fellow squadron horses, the last pure breeding stallion, whose genetic profile would ensure Harrison's vision continued uncorrupted. Redemption Springs emerged from darkness into light, its buildings standing as testimony to justice finally served. The Ghost Squadron had reformed, stronger than ever, ready to continue their mission of protecting the territory from those who would abuse power. Thunder's supposedly aged frame now stood revealed in its true glory. A warhorse whose capabilities had been disguised but never diminished. His years of playing a tired old nag had served their purpose, allowing him to complete the mission Harrison had entrusted to him. The legend of Thunder Ridge Valley had gained a new chapter, one that would be remembered as long as stories were, told about horses that were more than mere mounts and partnerships that transcended ordinary understanding. As the sun rose over the valley, Thunder stood ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The warhorse had carried more than just his rider through those years of waiting. He had carried the hope of Harrison's vision, the promise of true partnership between horse and rider. Some legends never die. They just wait for the right moment to reveal their true nature, to remind the world that the greatest strength lies not in dominance, but in the trust between partners who share a common purpose. The ghost of Thunder Ridge Valley would ride again, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when horses were recognized as true partners in the pursuit of justice. And somewhere, Cole knew, Harrison would be proud of how his legacy had been preserved, not through force, but through the very partnership he had always envisioned. The dawn had brought more than just victory. It had brought vindication of a vision that would continue to shape the future of mounted operations for generations to come. Thunder's legend was complete, but his mission would continue. For some partnerships transcend time, some bonds grow stronger through adversity, and some stories never truly end. They just find new ways to inspire those who understand that true strength lies in partnership, not power. The sun rose fully over Thunder Ridge Valley, marking not an ending but a new beginning for the Ghost Squadron and all who would follow in their hoofprints. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.